Hey there, it's Silver. This is Cornucopia. So this just came into early access very recently, and it's a life sim, clearly inspired by the likes of Harvest Moon and Stardew Valley especially, but it does quite a few things a little bit differently. It's got some really unique ideas behind it, and it also has this theme of sort of hidden depth, where a lot of its systems have a surprising amount of depth in them that you wouldn't expect, nor do you usually see in the genre. But in terms of early access releases, this is one that is coming in pretty content-rich, I would say. It's got quite a lot to it already. There's a lot to be found here, and I've also found it to be pretty polished, with a couple of exceptions in terms of just simply events not fully working correctly yet. Some of them are a little bit on the wonk. But aside from that, everything else seems to be pretty well done so far. So it's definitely well worth diving into. So it does have pretty much what you would expect from the genre to start off with, right? You start on a very crappy rundown farm that is overgrown horribly and everything is going wrong, and it's your job to fix it up so you can start making a profit. Now, you actually have a few more facilities by default than you might be used to in games like this, where oftentimes you have to buy a barn or some sort of animal storage before you can actually get animals. But in this case, that's not how it works. You actually start with a barn and a chicken coop, as well as a greenhouse, but you can't actually use the greenhouse at first. You gotta wait a little bit on that. And of course, a field, and the field itself is very large in this case. It's like really a lot bigger than you would normally think for a game like this, especially for just having one. It's a very large field, but it is, of course, absolutely destroyed by the time you get here, and you are given your usual cadre of tools to go about cleaning up the place. You have, of course, your pickaxe for stuff like stones and the like, and you've got a scythe for various grasses and bushes, you've got an axe for trees and fallen logs and all that good stuff, and of course the hoe for tilling the ground. And this is where one of the interesting ideas comes into place, and this is, I think, going to set the tone for what I mean by hidden depth, where a lot of elements of the game are more complex than you would expect. So it does do the traditional thing of you till the ground, you plant a seed, you water it, and you watch it grow, and then eventually you're able to harvest it and sell it or use it in recipes or whatever. But in this case, there's a bit of hidden depth to that, because in this game you actually have to worry about the soil. The soil quality actually has a couple of different variables for you to look at, and there is quite a detailed composting system in the game, so you can actually make compost from a lot of different organic materials, and different materials will make different composts, and different composts add different amounts of nutrients. And every plant seed, when you're holding the seed, will actually tell you what the ideal spread of nutrients is that it expects. And you can plant on anything, any ground in your field you can plant on, whether it meets the requirements or not, and it'll still grow, but you'll get higher quality and better yields if you actually meet these ideal conditions. So you have to actually balance the nitrogen, potassium, and phosphorus levels in your soil. It tracks all those, and you get a magnifying glass early on that allows you to inspect any given plot and see exactly what the levels currently are, and you can add your various different types of compost and fertilizer to the soil to increase those levels in whatever direction you need to make the ideal planting base for the seed that you're trying to grow. And there's also bioactivity as a fourth sort of variable, and this is just like general fertility of the soil. Basically, different composts can add a lot of bioactivity, even if they don't necessarily add a lot of other nutrients, just to help to make the soil yield more. So this is what I mean by hidden depth. This is not a system that you usually see. In fact, this is the first time I've ever seen a sort of soil quality system like this in a life sim before. But personally, I think it's actually a really cool idea. This extra bit of unexpected depth adds a lot to the farming system, because it means you have sort of a system worked out on your farm where you're trying to get specific nutrients to actually compost them so that you can make the compost you need for this given crop, whatever the crop is, whatever the seed says it needs in its soil. So you're sort of trying to match your various adventuring and material gathering and stuff to match with the stuff that you need to produce to actually fertilize your soil correctly, which is neat. It's an unexpected bit of gameplay variety that I think adds a lot, and it means that the game already has a lot of different crops to grow, by the way. Like, I'm pretty sure over around 50. I think it's closer to like 60 something. So there are a bunch of crops already, and when you add the fact that every crop has a different ideal condition, this means that there's a lot of variety in the ways that you can set up your farm, and it's going to change from season to season, and actually rotating your soil around and stuff and making sure it keeps the correct nutrients for what you're currently trying to grow actually becomes like a big thing you have to actually do, which is, it's just neat to have a mechanic that's that involved. It means that the usual life sim rotation of planting, watering, and harvesting gets chopped up in different ways that you wouldn't necessarily expect. But of course, once you've gathered your harvests, you can sell them, and the selling works like a classic Harvest Moon, where someone actually goes to physically sell your stuff at exactly 6 p.m. every day, usually on weekdays. On weekends, there's often like a movie marathon or something happening, so the dude doesn't come around. But during the weekdays, yeah, at 6 p.m. you will make the money for whatever is in your shipping box. But of course, there's also cooking. An important part of any of these life sim games is that you can keep some of your yield to yourself in order to use it for cooking. And this is another good example of unexpected depth, because the cooking is not traditional at all. Usually in a game like this, you will get recipes, and then you click on the recipe, and as long as you have the stuff in your inventory, you will make that recipe. Not the case here. This game has a much more involved cooking system where you have to actually use your stove, like physically. You have to go and get different pieces of like cookware. These are things you can buy in shops and also be rewarded for quests and things. So you can get like a wok or a pan or a stew pot and things like that, and you actually have to physically put them on the stove, and then you can fill them up with stuff like water and cooking oil to various levels, and also apply the heat so you can actually start boiling the water or searing the food or whatever it is you're doing, and then you actually physically add in the ingredients one at a time from your inventory, and then they have like full physics applied to them and actually like flop around on the on the wok and stuff, and you can cook them manually that way. And the same goes for like baking and other more advanced forms, because you'll basically have kind of like a Minecraft grid of like a 3x3, like 9 square grid of ingredients that you have to put in a specific order in like a specific formation in order to make certain things. So if you're making a cake, you'll have 9 different ingredients that are in a certain formation that you have to match in order to actually bake it. So all this comes together to mean the cooking in this game is very involved, like unexpectedly so, and is the perfect companion to the surprisingly involved farming, by showing you that this game is very much focusing on mechanical depth, while still having a fair amount of variety in the things that you can use this depth for. There are, of course, all the other expected elements, like fishing, although the fishing minigame is very non-standard. It's basically pachinko. You toss lures down a board that bounce around like pachinko balls until they reach different slots at the bottom, which will determine what you catch each time. And you do actually need bait to fish in this game as well. That's pretty standard for the genre, but you do need stuff like worms and things. And of course, you've also got lots of other NPCs to talk to, and many of them are indeed candidates for you to romance if you wish to do so, as well as a lot of them having their own sort of personal quest lines that you can go down that often intertwine with the main quest of the game. There is actually a main quest. It's not just a pure sandbox experience. There is a structured storyline for you to follow as well. And you can, of course, do things like gift people various materials and other exotic items to win their favor and go through their various personal events and things like that. That's all here, although I'm sure not all of it is in its perfectly finished state. There is still quite a bit to experience in terms of talking to other NPCs and going down their quest lines and things. Another one of those unexpected features is the card system. You'll find packs of cards. Generally, they're given to you by other people for doing good things or for getting achievements and things. You'll get card packs as a reward, and you can open these up to get various cards. And there is an entire menu that's like a card album, and you can use these for various things. There are consumable cards that give you some sort of bonus for a while, so it's kind of like a potion, right? It's like you use it and it buffs you for a certain amount of time. And then there are also stuff like quest cards that activate when certain conditions are met, and enhance the effect of whatever it is you're doing. And then there are scratch cards, which are exactly what they sound like. They're scratch-offs. You actually get a whole bunch of different kinds of scratch-offs. Each of them has a theme and will be a 3x3 grid with a bonus square on the side, and you can actually take a coin and scratch them off manually with your mouse. And you can get various rewards from these scratch-offs. You might get a couple of simple things like some baits for fishing. You might use one of the cards that's all about like gemstones and ores and get some rare ores or something. Or you could get nothing at all, but you will at least always get at least one thing, because the bonus square exists on all the cards, so you'll get something at least. But this is kind of a cool idea because it just gives you something else to do, right? Collect all these various cards for all their various cool uses. But at the same time, it's also a really neat bit of sort of expansion to the usual reward structure of a life sim like this, where you get these from talking to people and doing their personal quests and things, and it just gives you some extra rewards to look forward to, as well as some things that can affect future quests by enhancing the rewards and things that you get from them. This focus on depth also continues to stuff like the crafting system. There are several different sort of layers to the crafting system. It's your pretty standard idea of gathering materials to make certain things, but of course you have to earn blueprints by doing story missions and by getting to know people better and things like that, and sometimes buying them. There are several different stores that you can actually go to, and the items in the store are actually physically on the shelves, so you have to go and browse the shelves manually and click on things that you want, which is a nice touch. And I've also noticed a big focus on crafting and refining stations. So So for instance, there's a compost bin where you actually put your various organic materials to make compost out of them. There's also, of course, your furnace for processing ores into bricks and ingots and things like that. And you've also got a loom for more fabric-based stuff, and a sawmill for turning logs into planks. So there are quite a few, even a tumbler for opening like geodes and stuff and finding rare gems and ores in there. So this means that you will often have sort of a yard full of various machines that you're using to refine stuff, and these take a certain amount of real time to actually do their task, and you usually have to put roughly 4 materials in to get it done. So if you want to make a plank, then you need 4 pieces of a certain kind of wood in order to have the sawmill activate and turn it into a plank. So this means you have a lot of different things to juggle. You've got all of your crop stuff and all your composting stuff, and you've got all of your various machines doing things in the crafting system. There's even, by the way, a full decoration system for indoors. So in your house, you can actually turn on a decorating system and move around whatever you want. Basically, you can change what's on your countertops and change the layouts of things, and of course, you can upgrade your house eventually to make it larger. You can get blueprints and other pieces of furniture and stuff so that you can decorate it exactly how you want, and you can also do this with other properties you own, like your greenhouse and your barns and stuff, as well as there's some other stuff you can get eventually later on that's outside of your actual farm itself, like a beach house and some tree areas and things like that. So there's quite a bit in terms of like player customization that's going to be available. Another kind of unique idea is that all the tools have a sort of charge bar underneath their picture as you're using it that charges up, and once it's full, you can hit Control to use a special ability based on the tool that you're holding. This is basically the replacement for how in like some Story of Seasons games you can get better equipment that has some sort of charge ability, like the watering can being able to water more than 1 square at a time and stuff like that. This is the replacement for that. You build up a charge on your tools, and then you can unleash the charge for a big effect. There are also Stardew Valley-like mines you can go into that are full of combat. There's quite a few different enemies in the game to fight, as well as boss fights, by the way. And the mines work like you would think. Each floor is sort of a large 2D plane full of enemies and stuff, and as you dig, you'll eventually find a ladder that allows you to go to the next floor. And each floor acts as a checkpoint, so if you go back up and leave, you can come back later and get down to the lowest floor you've made it to so far. And this is actually part of where the main story takes place, because at certain thresholds within these mines, there will be special doors that can only be unlocked by befriending other town members and going through their quests, and they'll have a big boss fight behind them. I do have to admit, this is one area where the game suffers a bit. It's combat. Combat in this game is overly simple. It is mostly just holding down the attack button and hoping you do more damage per second than the enemy does to you, and then you win and move on, and occasionally pressing Control to use your big pickaxe or big torch swing to do more damage. It is very simple. You don't really have much input other than to hit things. You don't have like a dodge or anything like that. It is mostly just smack things until they die, which does do its job. It's not a bad combat system per se. It's just very simple. And in a game that focuses so much on mechanical depth with all of its other systems, it makes the combat stand out as being overly simplistic because you've seen what else the game can do, you know, and the other mechanics the game has, there's a ton of hidden depth. So to have the combat be so simplistic is a little bit disappointing because, you know, it's sort of a victim of its own success in that regard. You know, you've seen what it can do, and when it's firing on all cylinders, you've seen how interesting and mechanically complex it can make all of its various bits. So the fact that the combat is not that is unfortunate, and I think it might need a bit of an upgrade over time. This is one thing that I would recommend they definitely focus on in the early access period, is to improve the combat. Although one thing I will say, the boss fights are really good. Despite the combat being overly simplistic, the bosses themselves are really fun to fight. They're like mini raid bosses. They have multiple phases and all sorts of special mechanics that happen just in that fight, like spawning ads and throwing bombs from the sky that make you have to move around, and you have to do a lot more than just stand in one place and whack them until they die, basically is what I mean. They're actually complicated and interesting boss fights. So basically you combine the mechanical depth that the rest of the game has with the fact that the boss fights are this well designed, and you get a glimpse of what the combat could possibly be if it had a little bit more work poured into it to make it something better. So that's why I'm suggesting that it be worked on, because there are glimpses of possible brilliance here that will mean the combat is just as mechanically interesting as the rest of the game, and that would be a really cool thing to see. So my current view on Cornucopia is that despite the more lacking combat, everything else the game does, it does to a very high degree of competency. It's really good at what it sets out to do, and it does a lot of things unique and interesting in a genre with a lot of different entries to try out. So this very much stands with the really tall side of the genre where all the greats are, like Stardew Valley, I think, and I think it is absolutely worth its current asking price due to the amount of content and the amount of polish the game already has. I think it's a fair price to to charge. So yeah, my view on Cornucopia is it's really good, and I have a feeling that after its early access period is done, it's actually going to be great. So I definitely look forward to what else this game adds and polishes, and in the meantime, I'll link you in the description below this video to the Steam store page so that you can go and check it out yourselves. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.